On May 13, 1981, a 23-year-old Turkish man named Mehmet Ali Agca pushed through a crowd of 20,000 people in St. Peter's Square in Rome and shot Pope John Paul II 4 times at close range. The Pope survived. Agca was captured immediately. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment in Italy. Case closed. Except it was not closed, because Agca did not act alone, and the people who sent him to St. Peter's Square that day were never brought to justice. What followed the assassination attempt was one of the most complex and disturbing cover-ups of the Cold War, a conspiracy that reached from a Turkish terrorist network through the Bulgarian Secret Service to the highest levels of the Soviet KGB, and a Vatican investigation that got close enough to the truth that powerful people in multiple countries worked very hard to make sure it went no further. John Paul II was not a typical pope. He was Polish. He had grown up under Nazi occupation and lived through the Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe. He understood communism not as an abstract political theory, but as a system he had personally experienced destroying his country and his church. When he was elected pope in 1978, he was the first non-Italian pope in over 400 years. His election sent shockwaves through the Soviet bloc. Poland was the most Catholic country in the communist world. The presence of a Polish pope gave the Polish people something the Soviet system could not control, a figure of moral authority who existed entirely outside the communist state. When John Paul II visited Poland in 1979, over 10 million people came out to see him. The Soviet leadership watched those crowds and understood what they meant. A KGB assessment produced after the visit described John Paul II as the most dangerous man in the world, from the perspective of Soviet interests. Yuri Andropov, the head of the KGB, reportedly told the Bulgarian Secret Service that the Pope needed to be dealt with. The Bulgarian Secret Service had a relationship with a Turkish terrorist network called the Grey Wolves. Mehmet Ali Agca was a member of the Grey Wolves. He had already murdered a Turkish newspaper editor in 1979 and had escaped from a Turkish prison in circumstances that suggested significant outside assistance. After his conviction for shooting the Pope, Agca began making statements to Italian investigators about his handlers and their connections to Bulgarian intelligence. His testimony was inconsistent and contradictory in ways that suggested either genuine confusion or deliberate misdirection. But the core of what he said, that he had been recruited and directed by Bulgarian intelligence operatives, was corroborated by other evidence that Italian investigators assembled over several years. 3 Bulgarian citizens were indicted in Italy for their alleged roles in the conspiracy. The trial that followed was one of the most watched legal proceedings in Europe in the 1980s. In 1986, the Italian judge acquitted all 3 Bulgarians, citing insufficient evidence. The acquittal was not an exoneration. It was a finding that the evidence, while suggestive, did not meet the standard required for criminal conviction. The judge noted in his ruling that the investigation had been hampered by the refusal of multiple governments to cooperate fully with Italian investigators. A Vatican investigation into the assassination attempt was conducted by a senior cardinal named Agostino Casaroli. The Vatican's own conclusions were never made fully public. What leaked to journalists over the years suggested that the Vatican's internal assessment supported the view that Bulgarian and Soviet involvement was likely. The CIA's assessment, produced in the early 1980s, concluded that the Soviet KGB had been behind the assassination attempt through the Bulgarian proxy. That assessment was based on signals intelligence, human sources, and analysis of the operational patterns of the Bulgarian Secret Service. The CIA assessment was shared with the Reagan administration, which was already engaged in an intense ideological confrontation with the Soviet Union. It was never made fully public in the form it was produced. Agca himself has given multiple contradictory accounts over the years. He has claimed Soviet involvement. He has recanted that claim. He has made statements suggesting the assassination attempt was connected to a religious prophecy. He has said he was working alone. His unreliability as a witness has been one of the most significant obstacles to establishing the full truth. He was pardoned by Italy in 2000 at the request of John Paul II himself, extradited to Turkey, where he served time for the 1979 murder, and was eventually released in 2010. He has given interviews since his release that have done nothing to clarify what actually happened. John Paul II survived the assassination attempt and went on to become one of the most consequential figures of the 20th century. His support for the Solidarity movement in Poland contributed directly to the collapse of communist rule in Eastern Europe. The Soviet system he had spent his papacy opposing ceased to exist in 1991. He died in 2005 after years of declining health from Parkinson's disease. He was beatified by Pope Benedict XVI in 2011 and canonized as a saint in 2014. The question of who sent Mehmet Ali Agca to St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981, has never been definitively answered in a court of law. The Italian investigation got further than any other, but was ultimately defeated by the complexity of the evidence and the refusal of key governments to cooperate. The Soviet Union denied involvement until its dying day. Russia has never acknowledged any KGB role in the assassination attempt. The relevant KGB files from that period remain classified in Moscow. Either the most dangerous man in the world, according to the KGB, was shot by a lone Turkish terrorist acting without state backing in one of the most heavily surveilled public spaces in Europe, or the Soviet Union tried to kill the Pope and got away with it. The files that might tell us are in Moscow, and they will never be released.